So I don't know about that. Great, then I won't do it again. We'll see how it goes. But I hope though that this will be a blessing and just kind of answering. I got 12 questions from you all that, and surprisingly, there were 12 unique enough questions that none overlapped, which is great. And so I want to take some time to just kind of look back on Ecclesiastes, look at life in light of futility, looking at life in light of the hevel that is there, and to be able to answer some questions of how do we move forward? How is it that we live in light of Ecclesiastes? And what we're going to do too, following after this, is we're going to be looking in the pastoral epistles for the next 3 to 4 months, and that includes 1st, 2nd Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. And looking at the ideas of like, what does church life, what is this life together in light of, out of this futility, with a focus on Christ, that's grasping out, reaching out for Christ. What does that look like in community that he's given us? And that's where we're going to be going for the next few weeks, and I hope that this is a good wrap-up and a good transition into that. So, yeah, this is going to be a little bit different, so it may be a little rough. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I'm just going to ask the 12 questions and give you the answers as best that I can give them, and I hope that it's, like I said, a blessing to you. And if you have anything else in light of this, you get things, always feel free. I love to answer, whether that be by email or you come in. I love to do that, meet you over coffee and do that. So without further ado, let's jump into our Ecclesiastes Q&R, question and response. So, and I kind of try to put these in a sort of bit of an, maybe a flow that gets to some of the easy ones first. And the first one, I think, is one that a lot of you probably had. You heard me say many times, the question comes up, for question number 1 was, how did you come up with the frame narrator and the author theory that we've talked about in that? And, this comes by, that saying that I believe that there are 2 different people that are involved in the writing of Ecclesiastes. There's somebody in verses 1 through 11 in chapter 1, and then verses 8 through 14 in chapter 12, as little bookends that come into this, what I call a frame narrator. I didn't get it myself, but they're framing it and putting bookends on what's found in the middle of this from chapter 1, verse 12 through 12:7. That these in the middle are the words of Solomon. And it talks about him as being the king, son of David, king in Jerusalem. That these are his words, and then along comes somebody else from these words and compiles them, takes them together, and puts on a frame on the outside of it, bookends, and looking at everything he said, what do we take from this? And I think in a very practical way, the frame narrator comes about. If you look in verses 1 and 2, it says the words of the teacher. I'm going to stop there for a second. The word the teacher, that word there is the Hebrew word kohelet. Kohelet. Okay, it's kind of a fancy word, but it means leader of an assembly. It could mean, that's where we get the word Ecclesiastes, ecclesia, or the called out ones, the church. That's a Greek word. That's kind of where we get the word Ecclesiastes that comes. Why does it sound like the word for church? Well, this is a leader of an assembly. Well, we're an assembly, right? That's where that comes from. So this idea, it's a third person in those first 11 verses, right? These are the words of Kohelet, son of David, king of Jerusalem. Futile, futile, laments Kohelet. Absolutely futile. Everything is futile. And then if you look all the way back at the end of the book, going into verse 8, it jumps back in 12:8. It says, absolutely futile, laments the teacher. All these things are futile. You see this same kind of idea, this third person talking about Kohelet. Somebody is going to say, this is what their words are, and I'm going to sum them up. And then you also see in verse 12, I forgot to put it up here, of chapter 1, he says, I, changing the first person, from this point on, I, all the way through 12:7, he says, I, Kohelet, or the teacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. So this idea that there's this first person speaking all the way through, but there's third person on the bookends that's going to kind of look at this and get a frame into understanding what's going on. And I think it's kind of like, you all remember, if you've read the books or if you've seen the movie, everybody, and most everybody here has, Return of the King. When you look at, the Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, Return of the King, right? The Lord of the Rings. If you remember in the third movie, there's the great scene, you can maybe picture it, there's this great scene where Denethor, he's the king of Gondor, right? No, or sorry, not Gondor, but he's the steward. He's this steward. Thank you. Who called me out? Yes, good, thank you. Hey, I want to speak truth I always want to speak truth from the pulpit, so thank you. He is the steward of Gondor, and there's a scene where he's about to burn him and his son, right? And at the end, I mean, they get Faramir off, but he catches fire, and as he's running out of the building, and he goes and he runs and he flies off the cliff and goes down in a burning heap. I love what Gandalf says about him right there. He says, in that moment, he says, "So passes," before he was even dead, "so passes Denethor, son of Eckhelion." And I think in this scene, it's kind of like Denethor is Solomon, and Gandalf's the frame narrator, seeing the folly of how Denethor has lived, and he's commenting on it. You know, I think it's like Solomon set his life on fire. This author here, Kohelet, set his life on fire, and the narrator recognizes the fact, and he helps us to see what can be learned from it. And so sometimes I think the best way to learn is not always from a good example. Sometimes it's learning from a bad example, right? Learning what to do in light of it. I joke all the time, Ashley and I grew up in a very different families. She grew up in a family that's very stable, lots of stable marriages. They've been forever in Christian home, growing up in that. I grew up in the exact opposite. I think right now in my entire family, both sides, dad's and mom's side of the family, I am the second longest running person in both sides of the family without a divorce. And we're at 17 years. That's it. I have 13 cousins on one side, many on the others, aunts, uncles, grandparents, you name it. Like, I grew up in a lot of what not to do. She grew up in a lot of what to do. Sometimes life gives us a good example of learning, of saying, do not, learn from their mistakes, learn from what they've done, and grow from it. And I think that's kind of what's happening here in this frame narrative. What he's doing is saying, look at Solomon's life and learn from it. So, that's kind of where that one comes from. Second thing, this is an easy one. What other commentaries or resources would you recommend for further study? I put these up here for you picture takers. If you're interested, a couple of commentaries, if you're interested. Ecclesiastes by Peter Enns, one by Craig Bartholomew. Those are two very good, like, technical, if you really want to get in the deep woods, of things in the weeds there. I think a very easy, kind of accessible one is Living Life Backwards. And he's the one that he really looks at this idea of living it from death to life, going backwards in life. David Gibson. I think that one would be a great book to put on everybody's shelf. And then if you're interested on a flip side, you've heard me, I've put kind of more of a negative spin on Solomon. My pastor that I studied under at Denton Bible, Tommy Nelson, he takes the different side of it. He takes it from more of a positive side of saying, look what's been done under the sun and what we can learn from it in the good way. He takes it from the other side, and it's very accessible. His is called A Life Well Lived. You can hear it from the title. If you're interested in even getting the other side, there's other commentaries if you want, or anything like that. But those are four that I think that could be a help to you if you are interested in going deeper. And all right, this one, this is probably my most lengthy one. I thought about this one quite a while. In one of your early sermons on Ecclesiastes, you observed, and I shortened the question, you observed that one cannot find purpose in life without God. If you had a room full of nurses and doctors saving lives daily, would you make that same observation, or would you word it differently? I thought that was an excellent question. And I think just from before even answering, I think one of the things on that, just from the front end, you miss, trying to make an argument from 8-9 weeks is hard to make in one, right? You can't always say the same thing every time in the one case. So try, build that argument over 8 or 9 weeks, but, not knowing the end from the beginning. But in some sense, if I had the time to stand before them and say the whole of Ecclesiastes, I think my answer and short answer is absolutely, without a doubt, yes, I would say the same thing. Because I believe without Yahweh as the center, we fall prey to our motives for accomplishing tasks. I think if you go and look at the Sermon on the Mount, it's a great place. It gives us a great example of how God's thinking works. How does God's thinking work? And often, if you start with the Beatitudes, it's often what? Backwards and upside down, it seems, compared to our logic, how we do things. I think what Jesus clearly shows is how God extends mercy and love to the righteous and to the unrighteous. So I think there is an element there, of caring for all people. But I think he also shows, Jesus does, that proper things done with improper motives do not lead to self-fulfillment that we desire. Proper things done with improper motives do not lead to the things that we desire, the fulfillment. And I think this is the case with a life not centered around serving Yahweh. And I think can good deeds be done by wicked people? Yes. Look at our world, right? This is a great question by atheists all the time. Well, what about the good things that people do? Well, I mean, where does that come from? I think God, I mean, it's kind of like, God does this himself, right? He talks about in Sermon on the Mount that what? When it comes to the sun and it comes to the rain, what does he do? He gives the sun and the rain both to the righteous and to the wicked, right? I think good deeds can be done, but without the sense of living for more, that more being Yahweh, living for him, our actions fall flat because the person will ultimately, because Ecclesiastes shows us what, will die anyway, right? There's no guarantee. Ecclesiastes tells us that. I think the other side of the coin, though, is thinking about the person who benefits from the helpful actions of others. So thinking about, from the flip side, you're on the benefit side of things, right? Somebody's doing this work from, like, say, a doctor. Well, the reality is the action's short-lived, right? It will never outlive this life. It may or it may not fix the problem, right? Anybody gone to a doctor and had nothing fixed? How about this? It may lead to more problems. I mean, it does, right? Sometimes it leads to more problems. It may lead to the discovery of a new problem that you didn't have. Sometimes that can be a good thing, right? You go in for one thing and you realize it's something far worse. You've got cancer. You didn't even know that was a thing. That actually happened to my uncle a couple weeks ago. He's out. He had a stroke not too long ago, but he's recovering a little bit. He was out working on a fence, and a guy comes down. They've got the camera video of it. A car's coming about 80 or 90 down the road, and for whatever reason, they decided, right as they got to my uncle, they decided to switch lanes and come over and just clip him. Hit him. Thankfully, he said he saw, and they said he saw it just in time, like the video. He put his hand back, and it flipped him over and sent him about 40 feet. How he didn't die, I don't know. But in that, and going and getting a CT scan, they found out actually that he probably has cancer. And you go, wow, what a great thing that he came to the doctors, and he made it through alive. I don't even know how he did it. But he also, in that, he found out that he had cancer, right? Some things lead sometimes to a discovery of a new problem. It may increase your quality of life. It may decrease your quality of life. But at the end of the day, even though positive outcomes are expected, what? There's no guarantee that you're going to get it. Because the reality is what? This is why we sign medical waivers before surgery, right? Because even the best case scenario, you sign a waiver, right? Why do they label the correct limb before going in? Right? It's why we're made aware of the side effects. You ever watched a drug commercial? 89% of the commercial is the side effects, right? The repercussions that could happen, along with the benefits that a medicine or procedure may supply. And I think this too, how many doctors or nurses suffer because of the patients that they've lost to death despite their best efforts? Or even a procedure that just went wrong. And I think with this, so many variables impact caring for another human being that if we're not guided by the heart of God, then why are we doing it? Cultivating a heart of mercy is difficult when you have no God with which to gain it. I think without serving Yahweh, we're serving something else, period. Whether that be money, fame, power, rights that we have, whatever it is will lead to futility. Why? Because all things end in the grave. The only way we cultivate a heart of love and mercy when we know death awaits us is because we are connected to the God who already has and gives us the heart to do so. So I think we serve a God who raises from the dead and counts it as an honor to serve. Think about this. We serve a God who raises from the dead and counts it as an honor to serve and have mercy on those who were but sheep. I think without God, who cares for the sheep? The sheep have no actual purpose. Why? But sheep are too dumb. And so I think having this frame in mind allows us to find purpose. On the positive side, I think this is reality of anything. This is not just doctors, whatever. Anything in life, I think having the right mindset and understanding Ecclesiastes as it is, seeing life in light of death from the end to the beginning, gives all of the little things that we find in life that would be futile. Finding the one thing, grasping after Christ, makes all of those little futile things finally meaningful and lasting so. I think it's in understanding Yahweh that one can help someone not only live well, but I think what doctors do is also to help them die well, right? So that's a long answer, I know, and it's probably not completely satisfying, but I hope it helps to give a little bit of an idea, I think, of what we can find in this life that's not futile. Fourth question, was a teacher someone late in life looking back on his life from the perspective of maybe having achieved a lot, but realizing there's much more that he'd like to have achieved, or maybe done differently, or perhaps admitting there's no time left to do so, and he feels a bit down? Is this what he is? He's just kind of hey, I've lived life, and now it kind of sucks that I'm at the end, and I don't have it. I think that doing things differently is a critical question to this question. I think it's a memoir of life lived for self, and for the accumulation of money, people, things, and power. This Ecclesiastes, the author, Kohelet, is living for those things. And naturally, I think it leads to consequences of feeling unfulfilled and separated from Yahweh. I think Ecclesiastes is just a broadening understanding of Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. Look with me real quick there, Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. Paul says in Romans 1, what a great passage. Honestly, with much of Ecclesiastes, let's go to Romans 1. I think you'll find a lot of similarity. In Romans 1, he talks about, in 18, he says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness and unrighteousness of people who suppress the truth by their unrighteousness, because, look at this, what can be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. For since God, the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal powers, divine nature, have been clearly seen because they are understood through what has been made, so people are without excuse. In Ecclesiastes, you've got a man, Solomon, who, what? Knew plainly and clearly about who Yahweh was, right? And has even been offered the desires of his heart from Yahweh. What do you want, Solomon? I want wisdom. You have all the wisdom. You will be the wisest person ever, and you'll have riches, and you'll have rule. He knew very well, very clearly who Yahweh was. It was clear to him, and yet, what? Like Romans, for although they knew God, though Solomon knew God, he did not glorify him as God or give him thanks. I think in the ultimate, I see a life in Solomon that did not glorify God and give him thanks. But instead, what? He became futile in his thinking, and senseless heart was darkened. Solomon started living for something other than Yahweh, and I think his thinking went and his heart was darkened. And although he claimed to be wise, he became what? And this is what happens to anyone. Claiming to be wise, they became utter fools. And when he does that, he exchanges the glory of the immortal God for an image resembling humans or birds or animals or reptiles. So I think what he's done, and you see in taking on of other gods and other things like that, and kind of falling away from the true God, he worships the false. And so I think he follows his memoir as being handed over. So you see in verses 24 and in 26 and 28, over and over, God does what? Therefore, God handed them over. And I think it's a picture of what Solomon's done. He's being handed over to futility. Handed over by Yahweh to his passions and being enslaved by them. And I think that's the truth that happens for any of us when we turn away from that truth. A little bit of a change here. Question number 5. I was shocked to see the absence of an afterlife coming from a Jewish writer. I remember that the Sadducees of Jesus' time had also rejected resurrection and the afterlife. How common is the belief in modern and historical Judaism? On what do they base that belief? This is actually kind of a bit of a tough question because honestly, when you go into much of the Old Testament, the idea of an afterlife, even with Solomon, it's not just Solomon here. The idea of an afterlife is largely not there in the Old Testament. There are clues about it. I mean, David speaks about seeing his son that died, his baby that died, right? When he goes, that he'll go to be with him. Though that could just simply be he's going to be in the same place, in Sheol, right? There is a place for the dead, there is that, but there's not as much maybe that speaks about resurrection. I think you don't really see anything that's very clear until you get to Daniel chapter 12, which is going to be very, very late in Judaism. Daniel chapter 12, I believe it's verse 2. He talks about from the dust that you're going to go, but the dust you'll come back. Let me find that real quick. Daniel chapter 12. He speaks real quickly. He says, many of those who sleep, I don't have this up here, in the dusty ground will awake, some to everlasting life, and others to shame and everlasting abhorrence. So I think you don't see it largely in Old Testament until you come to the very late. Now, where you do see it come into play a lot for the Jews is in that intertestamental period. When you get into some of the books like Maccabees, it's very heavy there. If you have ever had a Roman Catholic Bible, they have some extra books in there, right? A lot of those, they're the Apocrypha, places like that were intertestamental. That means between Malachi and basically the Gospels, that time, that 400-year frame, is where you start to see that grow. You see it come along. There's a reason why in the New Testament it says the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. By that time, it starts to grow, I think, in Judaism in that time. But I think there would have been a basic understanding, regardless, that Yahweh had made a covenant with his people and that they would live with him, even though the full details of that life with him after death may have been a little unclear. I think they would have understood something of being with Yahweh. But by the time of Jesus, it does seem to be there. Even so much so, like looking at John chapter 11. You know the story of Lazarus, right? Lazarus had died, one of Jesus' friends. And he comes to Lazarus' sisters. Who are his sisters? Anybody? Mary and Martha, right? And it's funny, they both say the exact same thing to Jesus because Jesus took his sweet time to get there. He's in the ground for 4 days that they say he's probably begun to stink, right? They both ask him the same question. Or they say, if only you had been here, what? Lazarus wouldn't have died. They both say the exact same thing. But Martha says something interesting to Jesus that Mary doesn't say. When she heard that he was coming, she was sitting in the house. It says, Martha said to Jesus, or she said, if you had been here, but now I know whatever you ask from God, God will grant you. But listen to this. She said, Jesus replied, your brother will come back to life again. Martha said, I know that he will come back to life again in the resurrection at the last day. So Martha believed in the resurrection, right? Something in the last day when all things were made new, there's going to be a resurrection. Jesus said to her, I love this, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even if he dies. Christian, what a truth. Right? Our great enemy in Ecclesiastes is death. But if you believe in him, we'll live. And the one who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She replied, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who comes into the world. She still didn't understand it. But there is a sense and understanding of that. I think you come into modern Judaism, to answer your question, it kind of depends. Reform Judaism pretty much has punted the idea of a resurrection. This is it. It's become very humanistic. But Orthodox Judaism very much still believes in a resurrection at the end of days. So that is something that is carried on through. So that idea. But it seems that Solomon doesn't have a whole lot of that, right? You're going to end in the dust where you came from. Is how he ends. Chapter. You say how often I say these things. Verse and chapter. Question 6. If a person's wealthy and has everything but is not saved, is his wealth from a gift from God? Yes. I think absolutely. It goes back to the Sermon on the Mount, right? God sends the rain and the sun, both on the righteous and the unrighteous. All wealth is given by God. I think it's a common grace. They didn't have money hardly at that. There wasn't much as money. It was about what you grew, right? If your field yielded, didn't matter if you're wicked or not, your field yielded fruit, well, you got money, right? You have possessions. If not, that happens. But I think the problem lies not in the gift, but in the failure or rebellion of not recognizing, thinking the giver. When the giver is not recognized, in other words, followed wholeheartedly with the recognition that this is God's wealth, not mine, and it's God's property, and he has to say how it's used, not me, then I think our master has become, if we don't recognize that, our master has become our money. Look, Javen read it earlier, Matthew chapter 6, right? On the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. Do not accumulate for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and devouring insect destroy, thieves break in and steal. But accumulate yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and devouring insect do not destroy, and thieves do not break in. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Right? And I love it. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is diseased, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? That seems like a really weird place, like you're talking about money and possessions, and right here you're talking about light in your eye. But think about it. If the eye is diseased, you don't recognize the giver of the things. That's where he's going to go on. If your eye is diseased, you don't see the giver. The whole body is going to be diseased and in darkness. And what's going to happen is the wealth is going to rule and it's going to enslave you. If you don't understand that it comes from God and it belongs to him, it will enslave you. And also see Romans 1:18-25. And the turning over ultimately to what? Whatever it is you worship. You will become like what you worship. Whatever you love, whatever you go after, whatever your heart's desire is, whether that be God or something else, you will be like that thing that you worship. And your heart will show itself true. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but it will show. I guarantee you, if you love money, if you value that above all other things in your possessions, it will show out in your life. I guarantee it. And I think as a Christian, what we want to do is often we want to try to say, oh, well, I need to figure out, am I living for the right thing? Am I living for the right thing? And I ask myself all the time, and what am I very good at doing? Deceiving myself. What do we need to do is we need to stop asking ourselves, am I living for the wrong thing? And I need to start asking you all, am I living for the right thing or not? And listening to my brothers and sisters and letting me know if I am or not. I want to move on. Question 7, we've heard a lot about grasping and striving. What are some of the other passages that help us to further explore or unpack our motives for what we choose in our hearts to do? I think the best, simple answer, Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapters 5-7. It's a great place to start. It shows what the attitudes and postures of a believer is to be. It shows the character of God and how he's different and he calls us to be different. I think it also reveals the true motives of our heart when our emotions are covering them up. It's talking about all the false things that come about. I think it shows us how we must only have one master, and it cannot be money, right? It cannot be possessions. Other thing, we strive after so many things, we grasp after so many things. The Sermon on the Mount will speak truth to all the graspings that you have. I guarantee it. Go read Matthew 5-7. We doing okay? You doing okay? This is good? I got 5 questions left. I hope this is informative. How about this? Question 8, could James 1:5-8 explain why or how Solomon fell so far in his wisdom after asking it from Yahweh and it being granted? How might this James passage fit with what we see in Ecclesiastes? Let me read that real quick. And that's James chapter 1 verses 5-8. He talks about, he says, if any of you is deficient in wisdom, he should ask God, who gives it all generously and without doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed about by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord, since he is double-minded individual, unstable in all of his ways. I think it could. I think this is a good idea of maybe what happened to Solomon. I imagine if Solomon was looking maybe as a newly gained kingdom, because he just started out okay. He did start out pretty well. He built the temple, though he did build the temple for the God who rescues from slavery with slaves. He did at least build a temple to that God. He didn't always do a great job, but I think what it is, you see in time, maybe the best way to protect his kingdom, having other rulers approach him, he didn't want to offend them maybe. Might have been a simple step to shore up things for himself by taking wives or gifts to enter into contracts instead of seeking Yahweh's wisdom. He had it early on, but it seems that he starts turning inwardly to his own wisdom. I think this could be an example of a trial that James talks about. But instead of asking God for wisdom, he sought it in himself. Showing the doubt, being tossed about by the wind, and being double-minded. And I think you see God giving him nothing at the end. And he ends largely with nothing. So I think it's a good place to look and understanding wisdom that's from God and asking. These 3, I'm going to read these, and these are kind of in succession. This is all from one person. I'd love to hear how Ecclesiastes demonstrates the glory of God. So these next 3 questions kind of like build on each other, one after another. I'd like to hear how Ecclesiastes demonstrates the glory of God. Well, I think careful study of Ecclesiastes moves the needle for us all. Anybody feel a little bit different after hearing this? Anybody? I did. I mean, even preaching it. Helps you live differently, right? It leads us to wonder how we find and use the wisdom that has profit, like Proverbs, Song of Solomon, wisdom seems good, right? It makes us ask what the actual profit is under the sun. This book does. Ecclesiastes says it is to fear and to follow God, but what does that mean? What does it mean to fear and follow God? I think it means living according to true wisdom. That's a lot here, but I'm not going to get into it, but I think it starts back in the Garden of Eden, right? What were Adam and Eve doing in taking the fruit? Disobeying God, grasping for what? For the divine, for the wisdom, for the knowledge, right? It's the knowledge of good and evil. They were grasping for wisdom, but they were doing it and not grasping it where it should be found in God, but they're grasping for it outside and finding it in something else and taking it. And isn't that the kind of the story of humanity, right? We always are grasping for something outside of God. And that's what gets us in trouble. We're not inventive. We always attempt wisdom through the same means, getting it for ourselves. I think we must wait patiently on the wisdom of God. It's from Him, and He gives it to us. But where is that wisdom ultimately found? I think 1 Corinthians, and Jared spoke on this. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. It's found where? 1 Corinthians 1, ultimate wisdom is found. 1:21 and 24, it says this. For since in the wisdom of God, the world, by its wisdom, did not know God, God was pleased to save those who believe by the foolishness of preaching. But look at 24. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Ultimately, we find wisdom in God's Son, in Jesus. It centers around true worship. The question is, who do we worship? Who do we follow? Is it money? Is it power? Is it ourselves? Or is it Yahweh? Who are we following in this life? I love this quote from a book that I love, from Morning Star, a character, and he says, anything that believes in only itself cannot go happily into that night. I think that's the thing. What are you following after? If I'm following after myself, I'm going to go very darkly, rage against the dying of the light because it's only living for me and I'm losing it all. But if I have God, I can go for something else. How does this book advance the gospel? Well, I think careful reading and study will help us reckon with the fact that we don't live forever. The legacies of people we talked about, right? How many of you remember the names of your great-great-grandparents? Right? Just a couple of generations down. We don't remember. So what happens? How do I live a full life? What does that look like? I think the study of Ecclesiastes makes us realize that Solomon had embraced the serpent's wisdom from the garden when he said, what? Did God really say? Versus the true wisdom Yahweh himself had indeed offered. We saw 1 Corinthians 1:24 is the wisdom. Jesus is the wisdom from God. But look a couple verses later, 2:7. Instead, we speak the wisdom of God hidden, I love this, in a mystery that God determined before the ages for our glory. There was a mystery in what God was doing until who came along? Jesus. The mystery is revealed. And I love this. Look at this. Look at Ephesians chapter 3. Man, this is Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10. Oh, this is good right here. Listen to this. 3:10. The purpose of this enlightenment is that through who? The church, the multifaceted wisdom of God should now be disclosed to the rulers and the authorities in the heavenly realms. What is the point of the church? Is to be the arbiters of the wisdom of God. The purpose of our enlightenment, of understanding the wisdom, the true wisdom in Christ, is that through the church, the multifaceted wisdom of God should now be disclosed to the rulers and the authorities in the heavenly realms. I think the church is an example to the human world and to the heavenly realms that the gospel is true. Talk about advancing the gospel and God's glory from the previous question, right? So it follows that we must follow Yahweh's wisdom. It's there. We seek it earnestly, trusting and waiting for Him to provide. And then the third question in this is, how does this book encourage the life of a believer? I think it flows from the previous question. if we're living out as the church, living out the gospel, we realize, according to like James chapter 1, right? Count it all joy, brothers, whenever you face trials. We must ask God for God's wisdom and faith and believe what? That He will answer. We're instructed to trust that He will answer and that have no doubt that He will. I think Ecclesiastes helps us to understand that wisdom in this world will lead me to futility, but wisdom from God, I got to believe that if I ask it, He will give it generously and without reprimand, and that we can live a life of true wisdom and have no doubt. I think it's good to know that our lives on earth are earthly and heavenly examples, and that Yahweh is not as stingy with His wisdom as the serpent would have us believe He is. Did God really say? God's wisdom will hold us. And my final question, question number 12, and I think it kind of wraps a lot of this up, is what does an Ecclesiastes-filled life look like? How do we live in light of the truths of this book? How do we live? So in light of all this, what do we do? A couple of things. Obviously, it's called read the Bible, okay? So some of this is bigger, but I think a few things. I think first is that we seek the wisdom of God by prayerfully asking for it. We study our word, and we trust that He will supply it. James chapter 1, right? James chapter 1, if you lack wisdom, let that person what? Ask God, and who gives generously without reprimand, and it will be given. We ask for the word, for truth. We don't seek it inwardly. We don't seek it out in the world. We seek it first and foremost where? Where is the wisdom going to be found? Right here. Do you know your word? Do you want to know wisdom? Do you know your word? If you don't know your word at all, if you don't know the word of God, I can guarantee you're probably going to lack the wisdom that you're desiring in this life. You want wisdom? He has given us everything that we need for life and for godliness. His divine power has given it. So first, seeking wisdom. Second, seek the good of our community. And this is a preview of Timothy that we're going to look at in the next couple of weeks. 1 Timothy chapter 2, the good of our community. Seek the good of our communities. 1 Timothy chapter 2, listen to this, verses 1 through 5. He says, first of all, then I urge requests, prayers, intercessions, and thanks be offered on behalf of all people. Are we praying enough? Are we praying enough for others? Am I praying enough? Even for kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. Man, what a great honor to the church that we can live a quiet and peaceful life instead of looking like we often do, living a life of strife. Are we characterized, the church in America, are we characterized by peace? Are we characterized by those kind of a quiet life, godliness, dignity? Maybe we should be praying more. Such prayer for all is good and welcome before God our Savior, since He wants all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. For there is one God and one intermediary between God and humanity, Christ Jesus Himself, human. We seek the good of our community. Third, we enjoy our immediate community. Enjoy it. Hey, look around you. You see the other people here? Let's enjoy each other. Right? Relationships with other believers and our families, but we do not use them to fulfill our needs. We don't use each other to get what we want. We enjoy each other. Instead, we live together in such a way with such relationships that when we share the gospel, we share the gospel with those outside of here, they should be able to say, yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense why they love each other so much. It makes sense why they're so close. That the gospel that you're talking about, that's different because you guys are living differently. As opposed to, they sure fight a lot. And what's that gospel they preach? Because they're not going to listen to it. I guarantee you, they're not going to listen to a word you say if we don't look what the gospel should be. I think it's 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 14 through 16. Listen to this. He says, I hope to come to you soon, but I'm writing these instructions to you in case I'm delayed to let you know how people ought to conduct themselves in the household of God. There is proper conduct. Because it is, what is the household of God? It is the church of the living God, the support and bulwark of the truth. We are to be the bulwark of the truth. the foundation for it. And we all agree our religion contains amazing revelation. He was revealed in the flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, seen by the angels, proclaimed among the Gentiles, believed on in the world, and taken up in glory. Our conduct, the way that we live, proves that last part there to be true or not. It's not even up there. I guess it's not. I'm pointing up there. It's not. It points to whether that is true or not. How we live, how we conduct ourselves. I think we also enjoy God's blessing and use them to bless others, because that's what God did for us, right? He sends the rain and the sun on the wicked and the evil, and he says, "Go, don't just love those who love you," right? Who can do that? Who can love those who love you? Anyone. Low bar. Don't be excited when the bar's right here and you're like, "Ha!" Okay? Don't get excited. You didn't accomplish anything. But love those who hate you, who despise you. Bless those who do not bless you. Bless those who curse you. Give, and it will be given, right? Why? Why would I want to do that? Oh, Jesus did that, didn't he? Seek wisdom, seek the good of our community, enjoy the community, and enjoy God's blessing and use them to bless others, because he did it for us first. And so I want to finish this question with a word about what's coming. Like I said, we're going to start looking at, what does this look like? What does church look like? What does our conduct look like that can give us light? Now we live in light of the truths of Ecclesiastes. What do they look like in the light of the community God has placed us in? We're no longer to live for ourselves, but for the benefit of others, to look different than the world around us, to protect the sheep from the wolves, right? And to look like Jesus. I'm going to end with this. You know, I did this back whenever I did Leviticus. We ended with what does it look like to be kind of like this similar thing, okay? And living in light of Sabbath and living in light of Leviticus, what does life look like? We did it again at the end of Luke, and I want to keep going at it because I think it's great. Is living in light of the daily Sabbath, living in light of what Christ has given us, the rest that we have, the idea that he has given us meaning out of the futility. What do? I think 7 quick things. I just want to touch on them. But I think first, realizing that nothing we have is ours to own. Why? Because it's all going to go away anyway, right? It's going to be given to somebody else. You don't have any control of it. Stock market, crash, you lose it all anyway. House burns down, you didn't have insurance, or they don't cover that. I think second, we live a daily life of generosity. If I realize it's not mine to own, that it's God's and it's on loan to me, then I need to live generously to others. I think third, we move from a consumer pursuit of God, which is what we do a lot of times. What am I here for? I'm here for gimme, gimme, gimme. What do I have? What can I get? What can I get? To one of service. What can I give? We invest in each other's lives in the common areas. We can do it in the holy areas on a Sunday morning or when we gather together, but what about just in the common areas of life? Just the day by day things, that we invest in those things and we grow in that. Realizing that, right, the futility of life, but you know what? I enjoy the little things because it's involving you. It's involving the people that I'm building my life with. We become disciple-making disciples. We're following Christ, but we're calling others. Imitate me as I imitate Christ, right? Bringing others along. Care for those unable to care for themselves, because it's going to happen. There are plenty of people that cannot care for themselves. And we who have, give to those who have not. And I think finally, over and over and over, if all else fails, you're not sure about the first 6, grace. And a little bit more, and a little bit more. It's the only thing that transforms. This mindset helps us to live a life of joy and fulfillment and makes hevel a thing of the past. Amen? Let's pray.